Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to another episode of Talking Shiite. Today we are joined by Sheikh Dr. Mehdi Hazari. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Hazari. Dr. Hazari is on the board of Imam. He tours the country giving lectures, and he's currently based in North Carolina. Not only is Dr. Hazari an amazing scholar, but he's also received his doctorate from Johns Hopkins University. He received the Peace Award from President Obama in 2012. You can follow Dr. Hazari on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Today we'll be discussing the topic of Taqleed with Dr. Hazari. This is a very important topic nowadays. It's become controversial, or rather it becomes controversial every year around Ramadan and Eid. So I'm glad to have you joining us for this discussion. Let's jump right into it. Dr. Hazari, what is Taqleed?
Yeah, so the concept of Taqleed, linguistically, if you think about it, it essentially means emulation or to follow. And in a religious sense, particularly for a Shiite Muslim, Taqleed means that you're going to follow the practical rulings of an individual, of a person who has studied a lengthy amount of time and has reached a level of excellence, a level of what you would consider in the professional world expertise. And in this case, that expertise is in sort of deriving the laws of Islam from the authentic sources, which are the Holy Quran and the authentic Hadith of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam. And as such, Taqleed then becomes an act in which the believer sort of establishes their practical practice on a daily basis, whether that's their salat, whether that's their fasting, based on the edicts of a jurist, a mujtahid or a marja in this case.
Thank you for that explanation, Dr. Hazari. Who is considered a mujtahid and what are their qualifications?
Sure. So a mujtahid has two sets of qualities. If you look at it from a layperson's perspective, a mujtahid is someone who has to be a believer, a Shia Ithna Ashari, someone follower of that sect, a Muslim obviously. They must be male, they must be baligh of age of obligation. They must be sane, meaning they have to have sanity. They cannot be somebody who is devoid of that quality. They also must be adil and male. So in this sense, these are the qualities that are ingrained within that person, or they are possessing of that person. They also have to be somebody of legitimate birth. In addition to some of these basic qualities, and obviously going hand in hand with that is piety. So somebody who is known, and this ties into the aspect of adala, or being just, in that this person does not violate the rules of Islam in any way and fulfills all of the obligations. And if someone were to ask that, is such and such a proper mu'min, a adherent mu'min, somebody who follows the laws of God and stays away from the prohibitions, the people would answer and immediately say yes, that this is the case for this person. So they are adil in that sense. In addition to having these sort of basic qualities, the person who is then the mujtahid, or known to be the mujtahid, and in some cases then the marja as well, is somebody who has gone through a very rigorous and lengthy and comprehensive course of study at the Hawza al-Ilmiya, which is the Islamic seminary. And this course of study involves not only from the most basic levels, what are called the muqaddimat, which are studies in Arabic language or logic or the basics of the sciences of the Quran, or other very basic sort of subjects. But then as they sort of continue their study and their immersion into the Islamic sciences, they go to a level in the middle called sutuh. Sutuh is several years of study, rigorous sort of study, in which now you are getting into sort of the deeper aspects and the more critical thinking aspects, those aspects that require discernment and a certain amount of aptitude. Beyond that, then you get into what is called Dars al-Kharij. Dars al-Kharij is the highest level then in which you now see the sort of the training ground for the mujtahideen, for those people who are going to become jurists. And these are the stages in which now the teachers, or the ones who are instructing these students, they're trying to see whether the student has the ability to look at the authentic sources like the Holy Quran, like the Hadith, and derive appropriate and proper sort of derivations of the Islamic law and what sort of aptitude they have. Once they finish this or get to a high level of this, and receive approval from the teachers and the supervisors who are there in the Hawza al-Ilmiya, these individuals then become mujtahideen or mujtahids.
It's a lot of work and a lot of study. What is the equivalent of Western or modern studies? Would it be like a master's, becoming a doctor, or getting your PhD?
Yeah, so I think some people equate it with getting a PhD. However, I being a PhD in the sciences myself would say unequivocally that it is there's not really a perfect parallel between sort of the reaching a state of ijtihad or being a mujtahid and someone who has got a PhD or gone to a doctoral school or graduate school or medical school. But in a sense, if you were to try to compare the two, you're talking about an individual not only who has reached a level of study, meaning being in a school of some sort or a scholastic environment that reaches the highest levels, meaning let's say finishing medical school or graduate school, but on top of that has a great deal of practical application and implementation of what they have learned. So not only are these individuals scholastically or didactically very sound and complete in their knowledge, but now beyond that, they are professionally very sound. They have ability to apply. And the reason I say that the sort of comparison or analogy is not a easy one to make or one that is probably entirely reasonable is because a mujtahid spends his entire life in the study of that religion. And although he becomes a mujtahid and is established as a mujtahid, his search and his derivation of laws, particularly new issues that are constantly coming up, is an ongoing and continuous process. You don't see this as much in the sciences, or you see it in a different manner in the sciences.
So if I were to put it in my words, I would say a mujtahid is somebody who is a leading scholar in their respective field, like a leading economist, a leading chemist, basically the foremost, highest level of expert in their field of study.
Yeah, so I think it's not only the fact that they've studied, but as you mentioned, they've achieved a high level of expertise. So if you were to take, for example, given the current circumstances with COVID-19 and the pandemic that's sort of spread to every sort of inch of the world, today, even here where we live, there are experts who are at the forefront of guidance being provided to the public. These experts are not only clinicians or physicians, people who have spent 10, 12, 14 years in medical school and in training, but now on top of that have 20, 30, maybe more years of experience having worked practically in the field. These are the experts. And so when you talk about a mujtahid or somebody who then becomes a marja or is a marja to people, someone who is going to be emulated, you're talking about someone who not only has the foundational understanding in terms of the books and the material that comes out of the books, but now knows practically how to implement the tools that they have learned and do so in a manner that's sound and that will stay in line with sort of the code of religion. Just like a doctor would, after 30 years of experience, know how to implement the tools that they have sort of learned over the course of those years.
Now that we've established what it takes to become a mujtahid, what aspects of religion do we, their muqallids, seek their guidance on?
Yeah, so there are two parts of what it takes to be a believer, someone who believes in something. One is the sort of conviction in the tenets of belief. This means belief in the oneness of Allah, the belief in His adala, in His justice, belief in the prophethood, the imamat, and the day of resurrection, the day of judgment. In these matters, the matters of belief, there is no taqleed. So there is no sort of emulating anyone or following anyone in matters of belief. In matters of belief, you know what you believe, and that is between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, when it comes to the practical matters, the implementation of that belief in terms of daily acts, rituals, worship, salat, these sorts of things, this is where the muqallid is going to turn to an expert, a jurist, a mujtahid, to find out the proper ways of doing things. How is it that you should do your salat? How is it that you should fast? How is it that when you go for Hajj, you should make the intention of each ritual in the Hajj? The practical aspects are those aspects that you turn for sort of guidance and detailed sort of a systematic approach to completing it, such that that act of worship or that ritual is complete and hence acceptable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
What's the necessity for this? I mean, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, we're the only sect that has active mujtahids and people who are able to become a marja now. What's the why do we need this process?
Yeah, so it's, if I were to look at it from the perspective of daily life, anything we do that is of critical importance to us, we would never relegate its sort of implementation and its execution in the hands of somebody who is a novice or somebody who doesn't know or someone who we believe would risk us falling into sort of problematic issues or matters. For instance, if you get sick or if you have a severe illness, you're not going to go to a butcher, or you're not going to go to a carpenter, you're going to go to a doctor. And the sicker you are, the more grave your condition, the more sensitive the condition is, the more likely you will feel at ease if you go to an expert, somebody who has years of experience dealing with the issue that you're facing. You're going to want to be in the hands of somebody who has researched the issue, studied the issue, knows it in and out, and is able to apply the proper sort of remedies and tools so you can get better. The same applies for your religion. And it's a strange circumstance that today we will take recourse in the hands of professionals for the building of our houses, for any law advice, for medical advice, for the things that are related to the life of this world. But for religion, we will not consider it to be crucial or critical enough to turn to somebody who has studied the religion deeply. And that's why the religion doesn't say that you should follow the mujtahid blindly per se. It does say, in fact, that each person, each muqallid or each mu'min, each believer, has the option to study themselves and become a mujtahid, and to study with such depth that they reach a place where they can read the Quran, they can study the Quran, they can study the authentic Sunnah and Hadith of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam, and derive the laws of Islam such that they know they have fulfilled their obligation to Allah and they have stayed away from the prohibition. So every believer has that option to go and study to become a mujtahid. Yet just like everyone cannot go to medical school or cannot become a lawyer or cannot have expertise in maybe carpentry or building houses, not everybody can go to Hawza al-Ilmiya and spend decades studying religious sort of sciences and religious books and becoming ingrained in sort of the depth and the sort of the elemental and basic parts of religion. And so now Allah then says, well, our religion says that if you cannot become a mujtahid yourself, then instead either you should be a muqallid, somebody who follows a mujtahid, someone who emulates the practical actions and dictates of somebody who has spent their life studying the religion, or you practice something called ihtiyat in every circumstance. That third category, in which you are practicing ihtiyat in every category, is certainly feasible, in the sense that theoretically somebody could do it, but practically to practice ihtiyat in every circumstance in life would be very, very difficult. It would mean that in every circumstance you would have to know both one way or the other what chances there are for you to be at fault when it came to transgressing the laws of God. And that is a very difficult way to live. So hence you find most Shi'as are take the path of Taqleed or becoming muqallideen of a jurist.
And I think that's a fair point. Doing ihtiyat, it's not easy. It's almost unfathomable. But even then, nowadays, there's so much conspiracy, or conspiracy may be the wrong word, but there's so much like negative connotation attached to Taqleed, and that whole spirit is growing now. in the last few years, and that's very, very unfortunate. Just to alleviate some of that, can you give us a little bit of a background on what the basis is for this institution of Taqleed, and what the basis is in Quran, Hadith, and the tradition of the Imams?
Yeah, so one, it is common sense. It is the dalil or the proof for taqleed is aqli. It is based in reason. That again, very simply, we will turn to the experts in the affairs of our life, whether that's medicine, whether that's law, whether that's anything else. And so, why is it that for religion we seem to recoil when the thought comes of emulating somebody? And particularly today in the West, somebody who lives thousands of miles away, who we'll probably never meet, never see, never talk to, at least not on any significant basis. And so it's strange that Muslims, that Shias recoil from the thought of taqleed. And in fact, the basis is in the Quran and is alluded to very nicely and very beautifully. And the Holy Quran, it has a very nice ayah. It says, وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٌ. That don't engage yourself or become a part of a conversation in which knowledge is being discussed that you don't have any knowledge of, that you don't know. Don't discuss things that you don't have knowledge of. The ayah is very clear. And the second part of that same verse, it says that your body parts, every part will be asked. You will be asked. Your hearing, your sight, your heart will all be questioned as to what you did. So the verse is very clear, saying that if you don't have knowledge on a subject, don't talk about it. Hence, if you're not talking about it, how are you going to implement it? The other thing that the Quran very nicely explains to us and says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people who Allah has already given the knowledge and seek guidance from them. And there are enough hadith in the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam and the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salatu wassalam that not only clarify these statements in the Quran, these verses in the Quran, but expound on where you can find the guidance. And so there are traditions that are reported to have said, or that are reported to say, that our A'imma al-Athhar, like Al-Imam al-Mehdi Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif, or Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, they have told their followers that when you come upon a situation in which you don't know sort of the clear path in something, particularly as it relates to religion, halal and haram, what you should or should not do, turn to those people who have knowledge of our reports, who know the reports about us, the Ahl al-Bayt, meaning the things that we used to say, the things we used to do, and the acts that we did to demonstrate what is halal and what is haram. Turn to these people who know, and make sure that these are the people who are not only relaying authentic information about us or from us related to what is proper in Islam or proper to do or not to do, but also ensure that they are trustworthy, that they are pious, that they are just, and that they are people who, that if you hear something from them, you will accept the fact that they have a legitimate reason why they are telling you this, and that what they are telling you is completely authentic. So there are hadith that suggest this, but there are three levels of this. One, the dalil is aqli, it is reasonable, it is logical, that you should return to those who have expertise. Number two is in the Quran, and number three is in the hadith, very simply, and it tells you. And that should reassure anybody who is searching for those answers.
Thank you so much for that detailed explanation, Dr. Hazari. From what I remember and from my very limited knowledge, that there was a network of faqihs even during from the time of Imam Jafar Sadiq, if not older. And Imam Jafar Sadiq had given permission to different fuqaha to give ruling on certain things, and they would sit in Masjid al-Kufa, they would sit in Medina, and they would be able to explain to people why a certain thing is. Is that kind of like the basis for what we follow, what we try to emulate with the institution of Taqleed now?
Yeah, so I think our A'imma al-Athhar alayhim salam were very wise in that even before the ghaiba, the occultation of Imam Mehdi Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif, they began to prepare the Shia that realize a time will come when the Imam will not be accessible, and that he will not be present in front of you to answer your questions. And so ensure that the logical way of disseminating information is to train those who are close to the A'imma al-Athhar and have them answer questions, and create a system in which now you have not only the Imam or the source of the knowledge, but you have those who can disseminate that knowledge, who are in a tight circle, trustworthy, and become then sort of the marja, the place where you're going to take recourse, you're going to go back to, and you're going to ask that if I have this issue, what should I do? And indeed, the Imams would encourage any people who would come to ask them questions. Imam al-Sadiq, as an example, someone would come from Syria to ask a question. Oftentimes, Imam al-Sadiq would refer the questioner to one of his disciples, to one of his students, like Hisham ibn al-Hakam, would answer questions. And you see this tradition. Now, obviously, in the time of Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq alayhim as-salam, there was a little more freedom and openness to do this, and the later Imams then did not have that freedom. But it was engendering this quality of training scholars who were close to the Imams, who had the qualities of piety representative of that Ahl al-Bayt, and then would become a recourse for the other believers.
And you alluded to this earlier as well. After the ghaiba of Imam Mehdi alayhi salam, when did this practice become prominent of Taqleed? Is it the four in the, I think, 72, 73 years of Ghaibat al-Sughra? Is it the four Naib of Imam at that point, or can you give us a little bit of a history lesson, basically?
Well, in a sense, the process of Taqleed took shape after the ghaiba of Imam al-Mahdi ajjalallahu ta'ala farajah. And that is because up to that point, there was still access to the Ai in some form. Imam Mahdi had his four deputies, the special deputies, the four who were specifically chosen, and were then the recourse for people when there was a question or anything like that. And so in that sense, you still had a direct route to the Imam. You had a route to the person who can tell you exactly what the Quran is saying in terms of a law and its implementation or practical application in terms of salat or fasting or hajj or any other, or khums or zakat or any other law. After the occultation of Imam Mahdi, now the issue became that there is now hadith that exists that needs clarification, or Quranic verses that have to be analyzed and deduced to derive a proper Islamic law. And the infallible, the ma'soom, is no longer present to do so. Nor is there anyone to ask a ma'soom, because the ma'soom now is in occultation. So now the process of taqleed becomes that after the occultation of Imam al-Mahdi, that the scholars who began to study the Quran, analyze it, learn its Arabic language, the way in which the words are used, the sciences of ilm al-rijal, ilm al-hadith, knowing sort of which traditions are authentic, which commentators, which traditionists, those who are transmitting the hadith, which ones are reliable in terms of their trustworthiness. All of this study came upon the scholars after the occultation of Imam Mahdi to now then study and derive the law. And once they began to derive the law, it came upon the people to do taqleed of them. And this particularly is an issue, or not an issue, but becomes the case when you have to derive new laws. So in the time of Imam Mahdi, there was no internet. In the time of Imam Mahdi, there were no modern sort of issues that we face today. So Taqleed then takes on a shape in the modern times, or the times after Imam Mahdi. Why? Because there are new ideas, there are new questions, there are new masail that the religious man, the one who is knowledgeable, who has deep understanding, goes to the Quran, goes to the authentic hadith, and derives the practical answer for the muqallid. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and what also a thought that kind of came to mind as you were saying this is that, when all this was happening, the ilm al-rijal and the science of the hadith and all this was developing, it's not like that, when the Imam al-Mahdi went into occultation, the trials and tribulations of not just the Imam, but the Shia community ended there. The scholars that were putting this in place, the scholars that were in charge of developing this process for us to have a living and breathing religion, went through a lot for us to have this, and we should be just forever thankful for their sacrifices.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The other thing that comes to mind is, like, since this is a fluid and growing process, this is a concept, especially around this time of the year, always gets brought up. Why aren't we using science to kind of do moon sighting? I mean, Taqleed and moon sighting kind of go hand in hand, and that's where the topic becomes really controversial for people.
Sure.
So why can't we use technology to tell us when the moon's gonna happen?
Yeah, so the answer to this question is quite broad, right? And it is going to be probably debated for the rest of time. And unfortunately, there are some people who, no matter the type of answer you give them or the depth with which you answer them, it's just not acceptable or it's not reasonable. But I always look at it from 2 points of view, or 2 perspectives. One is that whatever Allah tells us, we have to do it. Sometimes the reasoning behind it is not clear to us, but that's why we are mukallaf. That's why Allah has made us obliged to follow His law. For example, if I want to pray, the time for prayer has come, and I go in and I take a shower. And I take a shower, I soap myself really nicely, I perfume myself, I wear clean clothes. Will I be able to pray? No, I'm not going to be able to pray because I haven't done wudu. But I showered, I cleaned myself. My body is clean. It's washed, it's soaped, it's perfumed. I'm wearing clean clothes. Why do I have to now re-wash myself in a sequential manner in which I wash my face and my arms and wipe my head and the tops of my feet? Why is that necessary? Well, maybe because the reasoning behind it is not actually to wash, it is actually obedience to God. And that if there is some other purpose behind doing ablution, we don't understand the significance of that. In the same way, we don't know why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said you have to sight the hilal, the moon, with your eyes, with the naked eye. He is the lawgiver, and it is upon us only to obey that law. And the other reason would be then that besides the fact that we have to obey, and that although it's seemingly more reasonable to use science to detect the moon or a telescope or predictions or etc., but if God said to do it this way, then it should be done that way, and it should be obeyed by the sort of the limits that God has created. But the second thing is, and I think of this personally, that not everyone has access to science. Islam is a religion that applies to everybody, to all times, to all people, to all circumstances. And me sitting here in the modern world with science, internet, telescope at my disposal doesn't mean that the Bedouin in the Tuareg in the sub-Saharan African sort of wilderness has an access to that very thing. He may not be able to read or write. Forget about internet. He would not be able to use a telescope. So does that mean that I am more likely to find the moon and he is not? Or that I will properly adhere to the laws of religion and he will be at fault and derelict in his obedience to God? No, that doesn't make sense. Allah's religion should apply and be equally accessible and implementable by people who live in the modern world and those who live in the wilderness. People who are literate, those who are illiterate, people who know and don't know, people who have internet and don't have internet. And so in my mind, it seems reasonable that Allah says, use this methodology that can be employed by anybody. And yes, it creates heartburn, but on us is to obey God's law and on Allah to reward that obedience.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, right? Like, even when I think of laws written by man, they always have the person that's the most vulnerable in mind. And they're trying to protect the person that's most vulnerable. So when man writes law and he has that in mind, the most vulnerable person in mind, God is way beyond us. He's going to have that person, as you spoke about, the Bedouin, the person that's, doesn't have the technology available to them, and forever and ever, like, God is going to have that person protected and have them in mind, and not give us any rulings that would put somebody at a disadvantage, basically. Sure. The other thing that comes up in conversation when this topic comes up is that why can't all and this might sound like a really basic question for you, but why can't all the mujtahids get together and do ijma? Why do we have, Ayat al-Sistani giving one opinion, and then Ayat al-Khamenei giving another opinion, then Ayat al-Fadlullah giving a different opinion? Why can't they all just get together and give us one thing to work on?
Correct. So it would, in a sense, it would defeat the purpose of ijtihad. So ijtihad in itself, the meaning is to expend energy or effort in searching through and analyzing and examining the source documents, the Holy Quran and the authentic Hadith, to derive a law. Now, if it so happened that they all had to agree with each other, then what would be the purpose of actually going in and deriving the law? Let one of them derive and the rest of them just tacitly agree or sort of concur that that's the right sort of conclusion. The whole purpose of ijtihad is for each individual to go in and search, and to, once they have obviously reached the level of ijtihad, to search and to learn and to see what the source documents are saying or the source information is telling them, and derive the law. In fact, it comes to the point that if this person becomes a mujtahid capable of deriving the laws for themselves and has reached that level, it is not permissible for them to follow the opinion or the edicts of another individual. They must follow what they have derived themselves. So it becomes a responsibility on them, and thus they can't just tacitly agree with what the other person says. It sounds like the more reasonable thing to do. That why can't they just have a council and sit and agree that this is how it's going to be, or that the first of Ramadan is Saturday or Sunday or Monday or whatever is decided? The purpose of ijtihad is not that. The purpose of ijtihad is to deeply study the Quran and the Sunnah and derive laws such that we are confident that we are obeying Allah. And each mujtahid goes in and does that individually. It is not a sort of a group exercise. It's not a sort of a council exercise.
I think that's, and you can correct me if this opinion of mine or this take is incorrect, but I feel like there's also a benefit to having variety.
Yes.
You don't want just an iPhone. There's a Galaxy out there. There's, a Nokia out there. There's all these different things that you can take advantage of. But not to say that if I'm a muqallid of Ayat al-Sistani or Ayat al-Khamenei, I can keep switching back and forth, right? That's not possible. If you buy an iPhone, you're locked into it for 2 years at the very, very least.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, what is my responsibility as a muqallid? Ayatollahs have so much responsibility, but what is my responsibility as a muqallid?
Yes, so your responsibility or our responsibility as muqallideen is that we should know the rules that have been derived and that have been sort of written in the rasail, in the manuals of Islamic law by our marja, by our jurist, by our mujtahid. And in particular, it becomes absolutely essential for us to know those rules that apply to us directly, and as a result of which, God forbid, we are liable to sin. So if a circumstance arises in my life in which I am liable to sin because I don't know the proper law, I haven't studied it, it becomes obligatory on me then to go back and to study that law and know what my mujtahid actually says about that, so that I don't make that mistake. So in fact, it is upon you to do that. Now, let's say there's a circumstance that just doesn't apply to you, that either biologically or circumstantially or otherwise, it doesn't apply to you. In that case, you don't need to necessarily know the law. But for a muqallid, it is best to study the law in the sense that I know what my mujtahid says is acceptable, what is allowed, and what is not allowed, what is halal, what is haram, what should be practiced with precaution, and what is a pure fatwa in that you should do or do not. In that case, then you sort of become deeper in your understanding of the practical aspects of the religion.
Yeah, I think, and these days that's easier to do, right? Because Ayatollah has a website. All the questions and answers that you ever want are always there. Ayatollah Khamenei also has a website. They have representatives that you could reach out to, send an email to, and get the answer in days, if not hours, which is amazing resource. The other side of this issue is that what if, let's say, I'm a convert and I converted to Shia Islam. How do I go about doing taqleed?
Yes, so you need to find a jurist or a mujtahid that you are going to do taqleed of. And it is best to do taqleed of the one who is most a'lam, the one who is highest in knowledge or has the greatest knowledge. And the way to determine which mujtahid to do taqleed of is because you yourself don't have an understanding of their level of knowledge or how astute they are in the derivation of the laws, you turn to people known as Ahl al-Khibra. Ahl al-Khibra are the people of experience. Usually these are the teachers, the professors, the instructors of the Hawza Ilmiya, the higher up level instructors who have been there for decades, who have taught many of the students, who know which mujtahid is most knowledgeable or which mujtahid should be emulated or the one who is a'lam or of greatest knowledge. You turn to these individuals, and then these individuals then say that mujtahid X or mujtahid Y is the right marja to do taqleed of, and then you follow that person. Usually this is the right course and the best way in which someone can find out.
That's fantastic. And let's say in my scenario, I've been, raised Shia all my life, and I come to a point where I say, you know what, I have decided to change my taqleed. Is that an okay thing to do, or am I just locked into it?
No, well, so there are circumstances in which you can change taqleed. So one is if you start off by following somebody who is obviously alive, you cannot start off by following a mujtahid who is already deceased. You start off following a mujtahid who is alive, and you come to know later on that his level of knowledge is not high, right? It just so turns out, and when I say it's not high, I'm meaning relative speaking, to somebody who has more knowledge than him. Then you can turn, or you should turn in any case, in those issues where there are differences in opinion to the one who knows more. So let's say that you are following a mujtahid who says it has a ruling on a given circumstance that says one thing, and that there is a more knowledgeable, a higher knowledged mujtahid or marja who says something contrary to what your marja is saying. You should, in those circumstances, turn in your taqleed to the one who is more knowledgeable. However, in general, it is not proper to change taqleed or to say that I'm going to jump from one mujtahid to another. You should stay with your marja and follow that marja. However, again, the sort of thing to consider is that it is always best to follow the one who is most knowledgeable, particularly in cases where there are differences of opinion.
I'm going to dive into that a little bit deeper if you don't mind, because I think that's an interesting point. Not all of us have access to Ahl al-Khibra, right? Like my Ahl al-Khibra, honestly, Dr. Hazari, it would be me emailing you or me emailing Sheikh Fayaz and Maulana Ali Raza Zaidi and saying, hey, what do I do? Right? How do I I'm at no point to kind of judge Ayatollah Khamenei's level of knowledge or Ayatollah Sistani's level of knowledge, Ayatollah Fadlullah's level of knowledge. How do I kind of make that judgment call?
Yeah, so I would say to you that nor is it up to us or in our purview to make that judgment call either. So myself and the other respected scholars are also not Ahl al-Khibra in this case. Ahl al-Khibra are those people who are part of the Hawza Ilmiya, who are there, are part of sort of the ingrained teaching methodology and didactic system that for decades has seen the progress of various students and scholars and mujtahideen and fuqaha, jurists, and they know. So in terms of access, there is no way for us to access it short of going to Qom or to Najaf or to ask them right there personally and say, who do you know? So what do you do? In this case, you would ask, or I could ask, a scholar in our communities here who knows somebody in Najaf or in Qum or in the seminary and will then come back with an authentic answer. We would only be able to then carry the message, that's all. The scholars who are here For most parts, all they can do is carry the message or send the request or the question to Najaf and say, can one of the Ahl al-Khibra tell us from there who is the mujtahid who is most a'lam or should be followed or is most worthy of taqleed? And then the answer will come back. But even the scholars who are here in North America, for the most part, these are not Ahl al-Khibra because they are not ingrained in sort of the basic practical aspects of sort of teaching in the Hawza.
There's a lot of division that's caused in the community, in certain parts of the community, I should say, because of Taqleed. What would you say to people that over different types of matam or over who you're following, this and the other? What would be that argument to like, hey, this is childish at the very, very least? And I'm saying this, not you. This is childish at the very, very least to be arguing with your brother regarding this.
Yes, I think it's disheartening to see it, unfortunately. And more than just the arguments, the splitting of communities because of taqleed, unfortunately, or what could be seen as a taqleed issue. It is against the tenets of our religion. It is against the philosophy and the akhlaq and the ethics of our religion to act in this manner. Why? Because we are all followers of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam. And because I follow one mujtahid and you follow another, should not create any sort of dissension. In fact, the basic tenets are still practiced. The furu' ad-din, the prayer, the fasting, albeit the day of start of Ramadan may differ or the day of Eid may differ, all the basic tenets are the same. If you and I go and pray together, we will pray the same way. If you and I go to Hajj together, we will do Hajj the same way, albeit maybe small differences. But those should be understood that God, with billions of human beings in the world, hundreds and millions of Shiite Muslims in the world, wouldn't it be normal to expect them to have differences? To have differences in their practices, albeit small differences, not those that sort of impinge on the sort of acceptability and legitimacy of the act in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So indeed, it is very saddening to see people who argue about taqleed, when in all honesty, the philosophy of Ahl al-Bayt is to come together on what is authentically known to us by Quran and Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam.
Thank you for that. And I would kind of add to the tail end of it is that the mujtahids themselves are not doing this. It's just the people, the people that get impassioned.
Absolutely.
Which is unfortunate, right? Thank you for clearing this topic up with us today, Dr. Hazari. Is there a quick message to those people who are still kind of on the fence regarding the issue that you could kind of give us at the end, kind of summarizing the whole point of Taqleed?
Yeah, sure. So I can say it from my perspective as a scientist, that somebody who is so used to finding knowledge and finding information and verifying what I consider to be true, at least from a scientific perspective, by collecting data and having empirical evidence in front of me. Indeed, that's the way to do things. And we apply that to our lives, again, to the practical aspects of our lives. But to religion, we somehow think that we know better than the experts. We know better than those people who have spent their lives studying the Book of God, the traditions of Prophet Muhammad and his Ahl al-Bayt, and that in some way I consider myself to be a slave or mindless because I am quote unquote blindly following this sheikh or this turbaned scholar who is sitting thousands of miles away in a prehistoric city. And I think some people think of it this way. But in no way is that true, nor is that logical. Because indeed, we refer to those people for the aspects of our life without even knowing them. We see doctors, we see lawyers, and we don't previously know them. We don't have personal relationships with them, nor do we even have always a good understanding of their training. We may only see a diploma on the wall saying that this doctor graduated from X medical school, or this lawyer went to such and such law school. We don't have any verification of their credentials per se. We didn't sit in the class with them. We didn't see what sort of grades they got on their medical exams or their law exams or their engineering exams. But for religion, for those things, for medicine, for law, for engineering, we accept the fact that these people are experts, and we'll take their opinion and we'll apply it to the most critical aspect of our life. But for religion, we will say it's unreasonable and mindless of me to blindly follow somebody who I don't know. Yet what we don't realize is this individual has ingrained themselves in religion and done so in such a way that they are providing you with the gold nuggets, the absolutely invaluable pieces of information that will guide your life straight and that will ensure that when you practice your worship of God, and indeed that's an indication of your love of God, you will be doing it with the confidence that you're doing it properly and not based on your own personal opinion and what you thought was right, just like you wouldn't do it for medicine or law or other things. So I think it bears some humility and some submission, and to say that our Allah has created a perfect religion, let us follow it in the way that He wants us to follow it.
Thank you for that. And I think just for the audience in general, I know we're leaving out a very important topic that's associated with Taqleed, which is called khums. That's a very, very big and very, very broad topic. We'll, inshallah, gonna down the road do an episode on that by itself, because it's such an important and such a big topic that we can't kind of get into right now. Dr. Hazari, again, thank you so much. Before I let you go, though, we know that you're infamous for your love of pecan pies. So, given in this current COVID environment, if somebody said, Dr. Hazari, here I have a month-long supply for you of pecan pie, but you can have this, or you can go outside and live a normal life again. But if you choose going outside and not living a normal life again, you can't have pecan pie ever. Which one do you choose?
Yeah, that's not good. That's not good at all. I also am an avid soccer player, and I'm dying these days because I can't get out on the pitch to play. But in all honesty, I may go with the pecan pie because of Ramadan. But unfortunately, I actually went to the grocery store just 2 nights ago, and they were all out. There was nothing. So inshallah, pray to Allah that He sends me some pecan pie.
Inshallah, we certainly will. Ramadan Mubarak to you, Dr. Hazari, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. May Allah bless you for all you're doing.
Thank you.